Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. How the heck are you? We are mid-September right now. How's your fall going? Is it cooling down yet, or is it still pretty warm where you're at? Today's episode is with Dr. Lindsay Gibson, who has been, this is, I think, the 7th time she's been on the podcast. She is the author of the book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, which is a very, very popular book. You'll hear a little bit more about it when I read her bio. If you're interested, if you're a first-time listener, you don't know who she is, you might want to go back and listen to the previous 6 episodes. You can listen to this one, but episodes 184 through 189 are all Dr. Gibson's episodes. I wanted to put them in a straight row so people who want to go back and listen to them can find them a little bit easier. We talk about what is an emotionally immature parent, what if you want to go low contact, what if you want to go no contact, what things might come up for you. What if you think you're an emotionally immature person? We talk about that need to be understood, how you can communicate, how to set your expectations. I just think it's a great episode. Now, Lindsay lives at the beach, and while we were recording, she lives near the Navy, I guess, and some planes were flying overhead. I'm not sure how much my editor can take out of that. She had to turn her air conditioning off. There was somebody there working on the compressor, but there are times when you can hear some noises. I just want to give you a heads up. I'm not sure how much of it can be taken out post-production. I think this is a great episode. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Gibson. Lindsay Gibson, PsyD, has been a licensed clinical psychologist for over 30 years and specializes in individual adult psychotherapy and coaching with adult children of emotionally immature parents. She's the author of 5 books. Her book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, remains a #1 Amazon bestseller in parent-adult-child relationships, with a 5-star rating and over 19,000 reviews. The follow-up to the book is Recovering from Emotionally Immature Parents, and the second edition of her first book, Who You Were Meant to Be, has been recently released on Amazon. Her book, Self-Care for Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, was released in September 2021, and her current book came out this month, Disentangling from Emotionally Immature People. In the past, Dr. Gibson has served as an adjunct assistant professor teaching doctoral psychology students. I always love when Dr. Gibson is on. I think you'll really enjoy this episode. And now, on to the show. Hey, Lindsay, welcome.
Hi, Patricia. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for being here. We had some technical difficulties for about 24 minutes late recording. We're just going to go with the flow. Let's just start out with, can you tell us what an emotionally immature person is, just so if it's a first-time listener, we're all on the same page?
Sure. Yeah. Emotional maturity is a line of development like any other line. For instance, we have intellectual development, we have social development. And emotional maturity is about certain qualities that really get socked into our personalities as we mature. Some people, unfortunately, don't do that. They stay pretty emotionally immature, and that's what my work has been about. And the characteristics that we would look for in those people would be general high level of egocentrism, very self-centered. Everything revolves around them, and they are the most important person in the relationship. They really have a problem with empathy. Empathy does not come easily to them. They have a real aversion to emotional intimacy, meaning that they just don't like to get into deep conversations about feelings and your inner thoughts and all the stuff that helps you to be known by somebody else. That's really not fun to them. It kind of disorganizes them and makes them nervous. So they tend to be quite guarded when it comes to getting to know them in depth. And they are very unreflective when it comes to thinking about their own behavior. They don't ask themselves the question, did I have anything to do with this? If there's a problem in the relationship, they don't think to say, gee, I wonder if I caused some of this. They just keep going in their own egocentric take on the situation. And they tend to have a kind of a adverse relationship with reality, meaning that if something happens that they don't like, they would be more likely to deny it, dismiss it, or distort it, even if the facts are staring them in the face. And this can make them very frustrating to deal with when you're trying to work out a problem with them, because they're not going to self-reflect. And their version of the facts will be the one that puts them in the best possible light. So as you can imagine, this constellation of traits makes them quite a frustrating person to be in a relationship with.
Sure. I hear you. Tell us why you wrote your most recent book, Disentangling from Emotionally Immature People.
It's interesting. This book started out as a workbook. That was the goal, was to do the workbook for my original book, which was Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And I started working on the book and sort of had this allergic reaction to the format. It was like, do this, try this exercise, give me 3 reasons why. Anyway, it was so structured that I just felt myself turn off on the workbook format. And instead, I asked my publisher, can I just do a series of the most important questions that I think I've ever been asked by any of my clients who are dealing with emotionally immature people? And my publisher said, yes, I'd like to read that. So I changed it to, I have 50 questions that you can go to and look up what's interesting to you. So each one of them stands alone. And there's an index where you can go and look up the topic that you're interested in and just flip to it in the book, which is nice. But there were a few things that made it through from the workbook idea. And that is that I do offer strategies. I have a space for you to answer questions in a reflective process. And then I give little short tips at the end of each chapter, which makes it nice because if you wanted to, you could just go straight to the strategy or the tip if you needed some help with that during a particular time. But that's where it came from. It started out as a workbook, turned into a series of answered questions, and then retained some of the best parts of workbook experience.
Well, and what I love about your books, and I was reflecting about your self-care for adult children of emotionally immature. I'm not sure if it's called parents or persons. Do you recall?
It's self-care for adult children of emotionally immature parents.
And I was with a client one day and I just happened to pull out your book and we looked up a couple of things that the client was struggling with. And it was so helpful for her. And because I'm a Reader's Digest, give me the bullet summary, let's get to the point. That's just how my brain works. And I was thumbing through your book this morning and it's so clearly laid out that it's very user-friendly, especially if you're someone who just give me the meat of what I want. And then I love the questions for reflection and then some discussion about, we have these ideas about setting boundaries. I'm going to set a boundary and it's going to be perfect. And you talk about, you might have some feelings, or if you choose to go low contact with somebody, you may have some feelings about it, that it's just very authentic.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that, because that was certainly the way I felt when I was writing it. Yeah.
Sure. I think what I'd like to do is to talk about the 5 parts of the book, and then let's just take some general questions. So I'm sure people that are listening want to have a little bit of substance, but I just love how you set this up. So do you want me to just read what the 5 parts are?
Sure.
So part 1 is, why are emotionally immature people the way they are? Then it moves on to how emotionally immature people have affected you. Stepping back, saving yourself, and then solving problems. So is there anything that you want to talk about any one of those parts before we move on? Because I just want to support you in the work you're doing, and I think you know what you're passionate about.
Yeah, I just want to mention that, of course, it makes sense why we would need part one, which is just to either introduce or refresh the idea of what emotionally immature people are like. But part two, how EIPs, that's emotionally immature people, have affected you, that is a topic that I really feel strongly about because I think that forms the backbone of my work. Because emotionally immature people, when you grow up with them, they really do have a series of particular impacts on the way that you look at life, the way that you look at yourself, how you cope, what you try to do to be a quote good person. So I really want people to understand that they may have been impacted by that upbringing in ways that they may not even be conscious of. And so that's why it's right under what emotionally immature people are like. It's like, and here's how they have affected you in your life. The other section about stepping back is, I think, hugely important as well, because if you don't know that stepping back is the answer to your own freedom in this kind of relationship, then you will get caught up in this cycle of reactivity with the emotionally immature person. And you just end up chasing your tail in a very unfulfilling and reactive kind of way. And just the simple idea of stepping back and trying to be a little more objective about what you're dealing with is tremendously helpful to people, I found.
Yeah. Can you either give examples of what it looks like if you don't step back or what it looks like if you do step back? Sometimes elucidating one is easier than the other.
Yeah. Well, if you don't step back, the odds are very high that you will become very emotional and frustrated with the emotionally immature person, because this is part and parcel of how they communicate with other people. They're not great verbal communicators. They certainly don't communicate overtly about their feelings. In other words, they wouldn't say to you, I have to tell you that thing that you did. Well, it really upset me because. They wouldn't do that. They would react emotionally and make you feel like a dirty dog or make you feel like a bad person. But they wouldn't necessarily come to you in that kind of straightforward, emotionally real way and tell you what the problem was. They will just act in a way that will make you feel bad. And when you feel bad, you get emotional. And when we get emotional, we get reactive. Okay. So that's what happens when you get kind of caught up instead of taking a moment to step back from the situation. When you remember, though, that emotionally immature people communicate with their feelings and by getting you to feel what they're feeling. It's just like with little kids, like a baby makes everybody around them so upset that they will do anything to help that baby feel better. They communicate by giving their feelings to other people. And that's what emotionally immature people do too. But when you understand that, and instead you're ready for it, and you step back into a more detached and objective position, then what they do can kind of roll off you. And you stay in a place where you're in touch with yourself. You don't get pulled off of your own position, or you don't forget about your own feelings or your own needs. You stay present when you allow yourself to keep that objectivity going.
And is part of that too, because I think we have such a strong need, some of us, to be seen and heard and understood. And if I'm trying to get somebody who's emotionally immature to understand my perspective and to validate and to mirror, I'm probably going to end up pretty frustrated and activated. Is that accurate?
Yes. And I love the word activated because that's really what happens. It's as if somebody's pushing a button in you and making you have these feelings. There was a period in there for a while in psychology where it was very popular to say, no one can make you feel anything. In other words, you're making yourself feel bad. And I understand what they meant, but the fact is that people make us feel things all the time. It's part of how human beings communicate. I mean, animals do this too. We act in ways that get the other person to pick up our feelings. And we communicate probably more that way than we do with words. So, yeah, that activation is, there's a tremendously strong emotional system that can get activated. It's not a small thing.
Yeah. And I think that tendency to want to keep going in to explain or to clarify, it just doesn't work. And to me, that's part of what I would imagine the stepping back process is. Again, I don't want to put words into your work.
Yeah, yeah. Now, of course, we want to be understood. We want to be seen. That's a common human need. And it seems simple. If we have the words to say what we're feeling and that other person speaks our language, there really shouldn't be any problem, correct?
You would hope so,
You
however.
would hope so, yeah. Makes sense.
If it's your people, then yes. If it's not your people, then no.
Yeah. But the problem is that when you communicate in this sincere kind of authentic way with someone, you are creating emotional intimacy with that person. And for emotionally immature people, that makes them very uncomfortable. They don't like deep emotional stuff. And so as soon as they pick up that sincerity or that need to be heard, something in them becomes very resistant. And it's very frustrating to the person who's trying to communicate with them because their motives are so innocent. It's like, I just want you to understand how I feel. And then I want to understand how you feel. And then we can be closer. I mean, what could be easier? But you have to remember that if a person wants to understand what you're saying, it doesn't matter how you say it. They will get it. But if a person doesn't want to understand what you're saying, it also doesn't matter how you say it because they're not listening. Yeah. And no matter how eloquent or accurate your communication is, they have a block up that keeps them feeling in control and keeps them feeling safe. And you're not going to get past that by pushing on it.
Yeah. One of the things Jen Perry, my co-host, talks about that I love, so food is one of my love languages. So if I'm craving some comfort food and I want to get some pudding and cheese and bread because I'm wanting comfort food and I go into a hardware store, there is no comfort food there. I'm going to find hammers and I'm going to find nails and I'm going to find things that are not comforting. And I think often those of us that love depth and intimacy and vulnerability go to emotionally immature people looking for our comfort food. And it's like walking into a hardware store, that there's valuable things in the hardware store, just not comfort food.
I love that. Yes, that's a great analogy.
Yeah. So recognizing who you're dealing with and what the limitations are, and doesn't mean that we're being inauthentic if we have to alter who we are, or is this just what we need to do in order to have communication and a relationship that works? Because if I show up being fully me, expecting an emotionally immature person to meet me where I'm at, I'm going to consistently be disappointed and frustrated.
Yeah, they just can't do it.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that lead people to decide to go low contact or no contact with somebody? And what are the ways that you help somebody walk through that if that's what they're considering?
Well, there can be a whole range of reasons why someone would want less contact with another person. I mean, all the way from that person is sarcastic or critical or even overtly abusive, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Or that person is treating their kids in a way that is not how that person is raising their child. I mean, these are the more serious things. But all the way at the other end, it can be that that emotionally immature person is draining. I mean, it's hard to be around someone who is very self absorbed and
Mm-hmm.
talks about superficial things and really isn't interested in you or what you're doing. I mean, it makes for a pretty dull conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and the spotlight is supposed to stay on them. And
Mm-hmm.
it's and yeah, you're supposed to agree with them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an exhausting thing to keep up for very long. So people get tired, they feel drained, or they feel exhausted. And then they really don't want to go back in for more of that. And then when they
Mm-hmm.
try to have a deeper conversation, again, because of that dislike of emotional intimacy, lots of times the emotionally immature person will pull back, change the topic, wrap it up quickly. Oh, that's wonderful, honey. Let me see if we need something more for this salad. Derail the more meaningful conversation to something that feels less stressful to them. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not enjoyable, it's not energizing, and people may find that they start avoiding contact. It may not be that the person is, so mean to them. It may just be that it feels so empty and actually
Mm-hmm.
lonely to try to keep interacting with them for more than a little bit of time each visit.
Right. Right. And I think there's this myth that if you choose to go low contact or no contact, that you're going to feel better. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, in a way, you probably will feel better
Mm-hmm.
because it's not easy or satisfying to interact with emotionally immature people. But at the same time, there's probably going to be, if it's a family member, there's going to be a lot of ambivalence. A part of you has really had it with trying to be what that person expects you to be, or to have a conversation that's satisfying to them, but deadly superficial to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because most people have tried really hard for years to try to get a more meaningful relationship going with that parent
Mm-hmm.
or that person. So it's not for lack of trying. Okay. But when they decide to go no contact, or they just avoid them for a long time, or they pull back and don't visit them very often, there is that feeling that maybe, they're being bad. Maybe they're not being a loving person. They're not being loyal. I mean, and these are real issues. I mean, we have to think our way through them and feel our way through them, because yeah, if it's a family member and there's a bond there, you may end up feeling bad about it. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no talking yourself out of that, unless, as I said, they have really been overtly abusive. And then you find that you can talk yourself out of it because,
Mm-hmm.
they're actually harmful to you. But the other important thing to think about when you're considering going low contact, or even going into estrangement where you have no contact with the person, is you have to ask yourself, will you continue to do the kind of work on yourself to individuate yourself, to find yourself as an individual? Will you keep doing that work if they're not kind of there for you to test yourself against?
Mm-hmm.
Because the good thing about emotionally immature interactions is that it does force you to be in touch with yourself. It does
Mm-hmm.
clarify to you what's important to you, what kind of person you want to be. And you end up defining yourself kind of by default. Like, well, I don't want to be like that, or I don't want to treat my kid like that, or makes you self-reflective. You're like, gee, do I cut people off too? And, when they're trying to tell me something, you
Mm-hmm.
start questioning and looking at yourself when you're dealing with these very difficult people. So if you continue to do the work on yourself, I think you can continue to grow in the absence of the relationship. But if you think that the estrangement is going to kind of make your problem go away and it's going to allow you to be your own person, but you just don't have to deal with them anymore, I would think about that some.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could move 3,000 miles away, not have any contact with that person, and still be carrying them around in your head without any real resolution of the impact that they've had on you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because this stuff gets internalized. And sometimes when we can go back and just watch how they operate and see how we were treated or re-experience how it makes us feel, that actually can be tremendously validating and also very self-supportive, because you're like, yeah, I was right to not want to be around these people.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to weigh which is going to be better for you, with the awareness that cutting off all contact doesn't mean that you're over it. It just
Mm-hmm.
means that you're not getting that input anymore.
Right.
But the goal should always be, under what conditions am I going to become a more mature, well-integrated person? And if the
Mm-hmm.
answer is estrangement, that's your answer. But
Sure.
if you decide that you want some contact, maybe visit once a year, or something very limited, then you can decide for yourself, what is the optimal distance? What is the optimal schedule for that?
Mm-hmm.
If I go, how long do I go? If I talk to them on the phone, how long do I talk to them on the phone? What time of day is best for me? I mean, you can set all kinds of requests and limits on your contact to make it something that is not terribly draining, but
Mm-hmm.
keeps some sort of relationship going. But you get to, all of us gets to decide how much contact we want with other people. That, at least in our society, that is a right that you have.
Right. How common do you find that people end up dating or choosing partners that are similar to their emotionally immature parents?
I think, unfortunately, that happens a lot more than we would hope it would.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
all about when you are unconscious, not aware of what you've grown up with or how it's affected you. You're like the proverbial goldfish in the bowl. You don't know that you're existing in water
Mm-hmm.
because it's always been around you. And so you're not in a position to say, gee, I'd like to try this other way of being with people. I'd like to find people that treat me differently.
Right.
Many times people don't grow up in circumstances where they're exposed to a lot of opportunities for being around different people. We're
Right.
in many ways a kind of a homogenous society. With schools and churches and jobs and things. They all kind of put us in a very similar kind of environment. Some are better than others, obviously, but it can be hard to take a look at that in an objective way. Yeah. So what can happen is that we gravitate to what feels familiar, And
Mm-hmm.
what we learned was love.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, there can be some pretty strange things that feel like love to people because they grew up with it. And
Mm-hmm.
what I've found with my clients is that many times they would have married in their early 20s, which is, when you think about it, a pretty immature period. Like one theoretician thought that people really don't mature until like their mid 30s. That's
Mm-hmm.
when you could honestly say this is a pretty mature person, that there's still a lot of development going on in your 20s. And
Yeah.
so if you marry someone in your 20s, it might be under the influence of a lot of ideals, similarities to family, wanting to get out of the house, wanting to
Mm-hmm.
start your own life. I mean, it can have a lot of reasons why that person seems attractive to you. But then when
Mm-hmm.
you hit your 30s or your mid 30s or however old it is, what I've seen is that people have grown in themselves. They have lived with this person for a while. They've become more aware of, through the marriage, of how they don't want to be treated, of what they feel like
Mm-hmm.
they're missing. And then you get sort of a tie back to the way that they were raised and what they experienced in their family. They start to make those connections.
Right.
Like he's like my dad, or he's like my mom. He doesn't listen to me like they didn't listen to me. They start making those connections. But a lot of times people don't do that earlier in life. They just kind of do the thing that feels familiar.
Right. And I think if people don't even know what's available, we get wounded in relationships and we also can heal in relationships, but we have to be around people that are healed to do that or in the process of healing. And how can you know that relationships are out there where people can talk about their feelings and you can be validated and people can disagree and it can be respectful? And if you haven't experienced that, then how do you even know that? And often I think what happens is we look for relationships where we feel good in the relationship and then maybe they're not mean to us, but we don't often have the skill to look at what is it that we want in a partner? What are our values? And do they have what we want, that we just want to be chosen? And that's often good enough without really doing a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah, I love that feeling of wanting to be chosen. That's, I mean,
Yeah.
who doesn't want that? But when you get that when you're young, it's a powerful draw.
Yeah. Yeah. Two more questions and then we probably should wrap up. What would you tell people who are concerned that they are also emotionally immature?
Well, if you're concerned that you're emotionally immature, that's a really good sign. Because remember in those 5 characteristics that I mentioned at the beginning of our interview, self-reflection is something that really emotionally immature people don't tend to do. And as a result, that makes it very hard for them to change because you don't feel the need to change.
Mm-hmm.
You're not reflecting on your behavior. You're not wondering if you could do better. You're just living your life and other people can take care of their lives. It's that kind of unfeeling or insensitive way of going about living.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you're a person who cares about a deeper kind of relationship, it becomes imperative that you do the work on yourself, that
Mm-hmm.
you detach and observe what the emotionally immature person is doing. And if you detect any of those traits in yourself, that you self-reflect. You're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
do I ever cut someone off, or do I ever downplay or minimize what they're telling me? Do I tell my child that they're bad if they do this or that? I mean, you can start questioning yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have any concerns about being emotionally immature, your way out of that is through self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people say to me, well, maybe my parents could change, or maybe my wife could change, or my husband could change, then my next question is going to be, tell me about how they handle their mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
What do they do when it's clear that they have done something that's caused a problem?
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to know there is, does that person have the ability to observe themselves
Mm-hmm.
and have some reflection on their behavior? And out of that, ask themselves the question, gosh, do I need to change something? Do I need to work on this? Because if you can do that, you are not 100% emotionally immature. That requires a maturity to ask yourself that question. So I just want people to know that emotional immaturity is on a continuum. Sometimes we're better than others. Like if you're sick or you're stressed or you're exhausted, you are going to be more emotionally immature than you would be when you're rested and well. So we
Mm-hmm.
have to keep that in mind, that any one of us can regress into more immature functioning under those conditions.
Sure.
But
Sure.
when it's kind of like, where do we bounce back to? And
Mm-hmm.
what do we do with the behavior that we've done when we were in that regress state? When
Right.
we do bounce back, do we apologize? Do we make up for it? Are we sensitive to the other person's experience? Those are all things that can be fixed, usually, if we're aware of it. So you have to ask yourself whether or not you are doing what you need to do to change or to make your relationships better. And then you're automatically in the more emotionally mature camp.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you have that question, as if you are, I think that's a pretty good indication. I've been sitting here trying to debate if I want to tell on myself. I think I'm going to, but I'm having some reservations. So I had a temper tantrum last night with my husband, and he's retired. So he was watching TV. He did some things in the morning. So this is not about what my husband does during the day, but he'd been watching TV in the living room for the day. And when I finished work, I went out because we have a show that we watch together, and he was in the middle of watching something. And I asked how much time was left on the show, and he told me. And so I decided to sit down and do some things while I was waiting for him. But then the show he was watching was disturbing to me. So I became disempowered. In retrospect, what would have been a better choice is to say, you know what? You've had the TV all day and I'm not enjoying this. So if you want to go in the other room and finish watching this, that's fine. Or can we watch the show that we watch now? However, that is not what I did. And this is not uncommon for me to get disempowered in the moment. So there's a bed in one of the rooms that I just went to relax in, but I knew I was angry. I really was feeling like, you've had the TV all day and, I'm not even going to come out of this room all night because I'm mad at you and you should have stopped and you should have, that's that young part of, you should have known what I wanted. I shouldn't have to tell you. This is a common theme for me. So this is not new. We've been married 26 years. And he came in to talk to me and I owned what was going on. And my husband tends to go into shame where he apologizes where he should have known better. And I'm like, no, just because I'm having a tantrum doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. And if the tables were turned and I had to figure out, when are you going to get upset about something or when are you not going to get upset, I would be exhausted because sometimes I'm fine waiting for him and sometimes I'm not. So I tried to use that example to say that he didn't do anything wrong. I get disempowered. This is what goes on for me. It stinks. And he felt bad that I was angry. And when you were talking, and I wasn't yelling, I was very calm when I was talking to him. I didn't yell. I didn't call names. I just said, this is what's going on for me. And when you were talking about, we do get impacted by how other people are feeling. And he felt bad that I was angry. I was able to manage it. But he said, I don't like when you're angry. I'm like, I get that. And that's just kind of where I'm at. The place where I get stuck, and I was aware of this, and this is just part of what goes on with my personality, is I know that I could have surrendered that. Like, do I want to stick with being mad and stay in the room and be unsatisfied all night? Or do I want to let this go and go out to the living room and go like, okay, I'm over it. Let's watch our show.
Mm-hmm.
I chose the young response.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not satisfying. And I just observed myself and really tried to have as much compassion as I could. And I'm human. These things happen. And in all the ways that I handled it, I owned my feelings. I communicated what was going on. I didn't blame him. I didn't tell him he did anything wrong. And this is what it means to be human. And I know for a fact that these types of things go on in all kinds of relationships, but we don't talk about them because it's embarrassing. This is just part of being human.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'll share one with you.
Sure.
So, we have now worked this out, but back when my husband and I first moved into the house that we're in now, we have a very open floor plan.
Mm-hmm.
We live near the beach, and it's a very open, beachy feel to it. Well, I saw that dining room table sitting there just begging for me to sit down with my computer and paper and pencils and start writing there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was doing that. And then my husband would want to go out on the deck, which was just right there. And so he would come through and go out on the deck and shut the door and open the door and shut the door and open the door. And I got very annoyed with him because I was trying to concentrate on writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking daggers at him every time he comes back in the door. And he says, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "I'm working here." And he's like, "The whole second floor is now become your office."
Mm-hmm.
And you're making me feel bad because I'm using the living space in our home and going out to
Mm-hmm.
the deck. And I was like, you're right. But because
Right.
I was under stress because I had a deadline and I found this perfect place to sit and write right by the pretty windows. And he was living his life in the same space. But
Sure.
because I was stressed, I regressed into a pretty egocentric attitude. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why are you bothering me when I'm under so
Sure.
much pressure? And we worked it out, and I got hold of myself and went downstairs to my office, which was expressly created for me to write in.
Mm-hmm.
It was really funny
Mm-hmm.
because I just wanted to be up where the pretty view was. But I actually had my own office, and it was just a complete misunderstanding of what we were about there. But yeah, we're not at our best all the time. We are human.
Right. Right. And my guess is you went to work there and were not anticipating the distraction of the door opening and closing and movement because that wasn't what you were anticipating. I mean, we're just human. And I think having room for our human frailties is part of what makes relationships successful and allows room for us to be imperfect. It's just part of being human.
Yeah, and I just want to comment that, for those people who worry that they're emotionally immature when they're not, that what would happen with an emotionally immature person would be that they would dig in and insist on being right and insist on
Mm-hmm.
blaming the other person. And they would hold that line because it would be really too much for them to deal with the shame of having
Yeah.
been wrong or having been unaware of the other person's
Yeah.
needs. Yeah.
Yeah. It would either be me telling my husband that he's not sensitive enough and he needs to be more tuned in, or him telling me that I'm not assertive enough or I'm too sensitive. And we'd be
Yes,
name calling each other and really holding firm to that.
exactly. Yeah. But
Yeah.
fortunately, in both our cases, we were able to do self analysis.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on with me? What am I really upset about?
Sure.
And then we were able to communicate that and work it out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that you want to say to wrap up or anything we haven't covered before we end?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing that I really like in this book, this Disentangling book, and that is to not feel bad if you can't reach a state of forgiveness with the emotionally immature people in your life.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we're encouraged to take a compassionate, understanding attitude toward people who have hurt us, with the rationale being that we're only hurting ourselves when we stay angry or when we don't forgive. But I just want people to know that forgiveness is not something that we have conscious control over because it's an
Mm-hmm.
emotional thing. If it comes to us, that's wonderful. But I want people to release themselves from any feeling of guilt or immaturity because they can't forgive, because it's something that is a kind of a grace that comes to people as they mature and go through life. And you can't always force that.
Mm-mm.
You can think about it, you can work on it, but I just want people to know, and that's one of the chapters in the book, that forgiveness is not something that you have to force yourself to do. And many times people are pushed to be more compassionate than they genuinely feel. And I think that really sends us backwards in our development. So you just be honest with yourself and decide how you want to be in the relationship, but don't set yourself an impossible goal if forgiveness is not working for you at that moment.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that we hear about forgiveness, and of course, in the moment, I can't think of any specific examples. Those are all written by people that are not deep thinkers and deep feelers. And you will process and feel and run through it as many times as you need to until you don't need to do it anymore. And we get messages about if it's distressing and you're having intrusive thoughts and you're not able to focus or work or sleep, then that's something else. But I'm not talking about that. But I know that when hard things happen for me, I will process it as much as I need to until I've had enough. I will have my feelings as long as I need to until I've had enough. And if that's how you're wired, that is what you need to do and be okay with it, regardless of the messages that you're getting from other people about you needing to be over it. Because if you're wired differently, you may not experience it that way. But however you experience your feelings and your emotions and your process is perfect just for you, provided it's not extreme and it's creating suffering for you. Yeah. Thanks for that. Lindsay, I always love having you on. Thank you so much for being here again today. Just love your wisdom. And this is an amazing book. It's got exercises in it. It's in small bite-sized pieces. It's rich. It's informative. So I would invite you to take a look at Lindsay's book.
Well, it's been wonderful to talk with you again, Patricia. I always enjoy being on. Thank you.
You're welcome. And where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
On my website, it's Lindsay, Lindsay, Gibson, PSYD.com. So it's Lindsay Gibson, PsyD.com.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Gibson.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I hope you have a great day.
You too.
Bye. Hey there. So what'd you think? Was this helpful? Did you get information? I always wish our interviews could be longer and we could talk about more information, but this is what we have today. If anything resonated with you, I've done a lot of work with clients around emotionally immature parents. You can always reach out to Dr. Gibson. I don't know if she's accepting clients or not, but if any of this resonated for you, please feel free to reach out to me. I currently offer free consults. I don't know if that's going to change in the future, but currently I offer a free 20-minute consult so we can see if we're a good fit. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. If you want to send me an email, I'm at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. If you call me, I'm really not great about returning phone calls, even if you leave a voice message. So you'll have a much better chance of getting in touch with me. Always check your spam because I do tend to respond to all the consults that I get. And sometimes I don't hear back from people. I don't know if my emails go into your spam folder. I think that's it. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how you're wired. You have a right to be here. You have a right to take up space. You have a right to be joyful, to be loud, to be exuberant. You have a right to have all of your feelings and to think about things and process things as much or as long as you need to. It's okay if other people don't like you, don't understand you, don't get you. Who you are is okay. You make a difference in the world. You matter. The world needs you. Have a blessed day.